A Namibian High Court has ruled against two same-sex couples who wanted their international marriages recognized for immigration purposes. However, one judge has urged the country's Supreme Court to overturn the ruling, giving hope to these couples. Judge Hannelie Prinsloo said it's time that the Constitution reflected social reality, so to speak. What else should we know about this case? Well, let's bring in the Executive Director from the Southern African Litigation Center, Anneke Meerkotter, who's with us via our video link this morning. And Anneke, it's great to have you on the program as always. Thanks very much indeed for making time. Interestingly, it appears that these couples were asking the court to essentially declare that the word spouse is applicable for same-sex marriages too. Is that what you would say the nub of the issue is here?
Good morning, Ayanda. Yes, absolutely. The case was about having, if you obtain a valid marriage outside of the country, to have that marriage recognized in the country for immigration purposes. Mm-hmm. And the reality is that there are many couples in Namibia and in other countries where because the spouse is not recognized as a spouse, it means that the spouse cannot obtain a permanent residency, the spouse cannot obtain a work permit. Some spouses have to enter the country on tourist visas, which are only for short duration. So basically, what happens is that families are really split up. That if you got married and you found a person you want to marry, wherever it is in the world, and you got legally married, for the purposes of Namibia, that marriage is not recognized. So your spouse, if they're a foreign spouse, would not be able to come join you in your own country where you are a citizen. Yeah. And whilst that is the situation, I think the High Court was very clear that this is unacceptable, that we live in a society where you shouldn't be discriminated against based on your sexual orientation. And perhaps to just say that the judgment started off with a quote from Archbishop Tutu, recently passed away. And it's a famous quote where he says that he would not worship a homophobic God, and he would not want to go to a homophobic heaven. And that basically set the tone for the entire judgment, to say that we cannot discriminate. And she was very clear that in a democracy where a country had a really terrible history of abuse and rights violations, that once one is in a democracy, you cannot cherry pick rights, and you have to respect each and every person in the country. Yeah, the late Arch actually saying he'd rather go to hell than to a homophobic heaven. Many of us remember that quote quite well. Yeah. It's interesting what Judge Prinsloo had to say, isn't it? I mean, she's essentially agreeing with what the couples are saying, but it's pointing out that essentially she doesn't have the jurisdiction to overturn precedent from 20 years ago at the Supreme Court. With that in mind, I guess it's a far-gone conclusion that this matter will have to be escalated to the Supreme Court, and hopefully they'll see things the way Judge Prinsloo does. Absolutely. I mean, it's the nature of how things work that lower courts cannot overturn the decisions of higher courts, even if that decision was 20 years ago and in an entirely different context. But you can't just automatically go to the Supreme Court and say, hey, can you overturn your previous decision? You have to start in the High Court. So we always anticipated this outcome, but the High Court was very clear in trying to set out their reasoning so that that can hopefully also be persuasive to the Supreme Court when we get there. Yeah. What is also interesting, of course, at least on the face of it, is that this is just one step in a long battle ahead. What these couples are asking for is amendments to Namibia's immigration laws. And this is couples who got married outside the country, asking those marriages to be recognized in the country. What about same-sex couples who are hoping to get married in Namibia? Is that a different case altogether that's going to need a different litigation process? Yes, absolutely. Plus, marriages are not allowed. Same-sex marriages are not allowed in Namibia, so it wouldn't be possible at all. And because it's not allowed, it has repercussions in so many different ways apart from immigration. But yes, that's still a long way ahead. The first step would be for the country to actually decriminalize same-sex sex, and there has been very positive discussions around that within the government over the past few years. So we are hopeful that Namibia will soon join South Africa in recognizing everyone in the country equally.
You certainly you do get a sense that there's some kind of momentum, right? After South Africa, there were several other countries, including Botswana recently. The Botswanan judiciary is really respected on the continent, dare I say, and one has to wonder whether or not even the Namibian judiciary is watching what their peers, for lack of a better term, are doing in other parts of the continent, and that may very well inform how they view this issue.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we're very, very hopeful that things will turn out okay in Namibia.
Yeah. All right. Anneke, Meerkotter, thanks very much indeed for speaking to us. Very important story that we'll keep watching as it continues to develop. Anneke is the Executive Director from the Southern African Litigation Center. Thanks very much indeed.